The text came in while I was standing in the humid gravel parking lot of the Grand Savannah Estates, watching the sunset bleed a bruised purple across the Georgia pines. "Where the hell are you? Your brother's entourage has been here for an hour. Don't embarrass us tonight, Aaron." I stared at the glowing screen of my phone. The glass cracked across the corner from a hard landing in the Helmand province 2 years ago. I didn't reply. I locked the screen, slipped the phone into the pocket of my faded jeans, and adjusted the collar of my worn leather jacket. It was a Thursday night, the air thick enough to taste like copper and wet dirt, a typical southern evening that usually promised a storm. Inside the grand ballroom, the atmosphere smelled of expensive floor wax, heavy French perfume, and the kind of wealth that liked to shout so everyone knew it was in the room. This was my grandfather's 70th birthday gala clan reunion for the Pierce family. Strings of white lights stretched across the high cedar ceilings, and a live jazz trio played softly near the bar, their notes floating over the clinking of crystal champagne flutes. The moment I stepped through the double oak doors, the noise didn't stop, but the warmth did. At least on one side of the room, my mother Valerie spotted me first. She was wearing a cream-colored silk dress that probably cost more than a junior enlisted sailor's annual salary, her throat draped in pearls. She didn't smile. Her eyes swept over my flannel shirt, my scuffed boots, and the quiet, heavy way I carried my shoulders. Her nostrils pinched together instantly, an expression of pure, practiced distaste. "Look at you," she hissed, marching over and pulling me into a shadow near the service entrance before anyone else could look. "I told you to wear the navy suit I sent to your apartment. You look lovely, Aaron. Like you just crawled out of a trench. Your brother brought 3 news crews to cover his donation tonight, and you walk in looking like a drifter." "My flight from D.C. was delayed, Mom," I said. My voice was flat, steady, calibrated to a frequency that gave nothing away. Military life teaches you how to control your breathing under pressure. It saves your life when the air gets thin, and it keeps you from breaking jaws when your own blood treats you like an inconvenience. I came straight from the tarmac. "Of course you did. Always an excuse," she snapped, her voice sharp as a straight razor dipped in honey. She didn't ask if I was hungry. She didn't ask how my deployment had been. She just looked past my ear, scanning the crowd to make sure none of her country club friends saw her talking to the disappointment. "Go find your father. He's already irritated." I found Arthur Pierce standing near the custom-built stone fireplace surrounded by 3 uncles and a county commissioner. He was holding a glass of scotch that cost $50 a pour, his chest puffed out like a rooster auditing a coop. When he saw me approach, his face hardened into a mask of polite disappointment. "Aaron," he said, nodding once. No handshake, no embrace. "Glad you could make time for the family between whatever paperwork you're stamping up there in Maryland." "Happy birthday to grandfather, Dad," I replied, keeping my hands resting loosely in my pockets. "Yeah, well, make sure you don't bring up your little army stories to the commissioner," Arthur muttered, lowering his voice so the guests wouldn't hear. "People here want to celebrate actual achievements tonight. Your brother, Jason, just closed a 9-figure supply contract with the Department of Defense Logistics Branch. Real work. Something you can hold in your hand and count." Before I could answer, a hand clapped down hard on my shoulder. It was heavy, smelling of expensive cologne and expensive whiskey. Jason, my older brother, the golden boy, the millionaire entrepreneur who had spent his entire adult life bouncing from failed tech startups to real estate scams, each time rescued by my father's checkbook, until he finally landed on a defense consulting firm that existed entirely on paper and stolen credibility. He was wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit, a silk pocket square folded into a perfect crown, and a smile so arrogant it made my teeth ache. "There he is, the backbone of our nation's bureaucracy," Jason boomed, his voice carrying far enough to make a nearby table of cousins look over and chuckle. "How's the supply room, little brother? You still counting boxes of boots for a living? If the army budget gets cut, you let me know. My firm is expanding our logistics department. I could probably get you a gig managing our warehouse inventory. 10 grand a month. That's way more than the government cork you're living on." "I do all right, Jason," I said calmly. "Sure you do, buddy. Sure you do. Jason laughed, a thin, nasal sound that carried no genuine humor, only contempt. He turned to my father, adjusting his gold cufflinks. Dad, the catering manager, asked about the seating chart. We need room at the head table for the regional director of procurement. He's flying in tonight to finalize our maritime supply lines. Arthur nodded proudly, his eyes radiating adulation. Of course, son. Put Jason's people right up front. The family needs to see what a real legacy looks like. Then, my father swiveled toward me, his thumb gesturing toward the back of the ballroom, right next to the kitchen doors and the service hallway. Aaron, go sit at table 14. It's the overflow spot for the drivers and the staff. It's kuhurk. Puha each time vlaspeits back there. You'll be more comfortable. Table 14, I repeated. Don't start drama, Aaron. My mother intervened, appearing from the crowd and placing an acrylic-tipped finger hard against my chest, right over my sternum. The pressure was light, but the intent was heavy. Your brother is the center of this family now. He supports this entire estate. Your father's business survived the winter because Jason wired us $80,000 from his corporate account. You haven't sent a dime home since you left for boot camp at 18. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper, swallowing the blood whole. They didn't know. They had no idea that the $80,000 Jason had wired them didn't come from his shell corporation. It had been pulled from my own combat hazard pay fund, quietly routed through a blind trust I'd set up to keep my father's construction business from collapsing while I was pinned down in a classified operation zone in the Mediterranean. I didn't want their gratitude. I had wanted stability for my grandfather, but people are comfortable with sacrifice as long as it remains invisible. Strong sons became infrastructure eventually. I'll go find my seat, I said softly. Good boy, Jason smirked, turning his back to me before I even stepped away. And hey, Aaron, if a server passes by with the prime rib, grab a plate. I paid for the premium catering package. I want to make sure even the budget soldiers get a taste of how the upper class eats. I turned, squaring my shoulders into the rigid, unbreakable posture I'd worn for 18 years in uniform, and walked away from the warmth of the fireplace. Table 14 was exactly what they promised, a shaky folding table covered in a thin linen cloth, tucked behind a decorative plastic fern, directly beneath the buzzing fluorescent lights of the kitchen corridor. 2 catering drivers and an assistant photographer were already sitting there eating cold chicken sliders in silence. I sat down, pulled my glass of club soda no ice. The bartender had run out 20 minutes ago, and looked out across the glittering ballroom. 5 miles away, the Savannah River was rolling dark and silent into the Atlantic. Out there, in the real world, the world of explosive ordnance and elite warfare, I wasn't Aaron the clerk. I wasn't the disposable younger son sitting by the garbage bins. But tonight, I made a strategic decision to shrink. I compressed myself into the smallest possible volume, letting my family orbit around Jason's fake empire without my shadow getting in the way. I locked my pride inside a bag and left it there. Verbal resistance is ammunition wasted on armored ignorance. I lifted my water glass, scanned Jason's sweating face through the gaps in the plastic fern, and allowed one micro-expression to cross my lips, a smile so cold it belonged in a morgue. The detonator for this entire evening had already been armed months ago, and my family was currently piloting their own ship at full speed into a reef they couldn't see. I looked at my watch, 8:12 p.m. Apari. The storm outside was finally beginning to rattle the windows. The kitchen doors behind me kept swinging open, every motion accompanied by the wet, greasy blast of burnt butter, discarded prime rib bones, and the frantic barking of the head chef. Table 14 didn't just sit in the shadows, it was the biological drain of the Grand Savannah Estates ballroom. The catering drivers across from me didn't talk. One of them, an older guy with a gray mustache and a faded Savannah Ports cap, gave me a long look, noted the stiff alignment of my spine, and then went back to tearing through a cold chicken slider. I didn't blame him. In this house, silence wasn't just a survival mechanism, it was a layout plan. Across the expanse of the polished marble floor, the party was shifting into its secondary phase, the performance of scale. My brother Jason had taken up a permanent firing position near the custom stone fireplace, his hands moving with the wide, dramatic sweeps of a man who spent his life pitching illusions to people desperate enough to buy them. He was surrounded by a tightening circle of uncles, cousins, and local small-town investors from Akron and Savannah who looked at his Tom Ford suit like it was a map to a treasure buried in the backyard. The procurement infrastructure inside the Department of Defense isn't about regulations, gentlemen. Jason's voice drifted across the room, booming with that oily, nasal projection he'd perfected during his years running shell companies. He raised his glass of scotch, letting the firelight catch the amber liquid. It's about access. It's about knowing which hallway in the Pentagon leads to the guy holding the stamp. My firm, Pierce Global Logistics, doesn't just ship freight. We ship certainty. Arthur, my father, was nodding along, his face flushed red from 4 glasses of premium Macallan and an intense, almost frantic pride. He was laughing too loudly at Jason's jokes, clapping his hand against my brother's shoulder like he was checking the weld on a piece of structural steel. "Tell them about the maritime supply corridors, Jace," Arthur encouraged, his voice cutting through the soft jazz. "Tell them what the regional director told you last Tuesday." Jason tilted his chin skyward, his smirk widening. "Oh, the regional director? He called me from his private office while he was reviewing our proposal. He told me, Jason, your family name is the only thing standing between our transport fleet and total operational gridlock. He knows who holds the levers. That's why we're finalizing a 9-figure supply contract before the market opens on Monday." An uncle whistled. A cousin clapped. The entire group leaned in closer, their faces reflecting the specific, desperate adulation that money, even fake money, demands from the insecure. I took another sip of my club soda. It was lukewarm now. The water tasted flat against my tongue, a clean contrast to the syrupy, thick heat of the ballroom. I've seen real procurement operations. I spent the last 9 years overseeing transport corridors across 3 contested international maritime sectors. I'd signed off on logistics shipments that involved more black budget funding in a single afternoon than my father's construction business had grossed in 40 years. I knew the actual mechanics of defense contracts. They didn't happen in bars, they didn't involve 3-piece suits and news crews, and they damn sure didn't rely on a man who still had a collection agency calling his personal cell phone 3 times a week. But back home, the truth was an unwanted guest. To Arthur and Valerie, Jason was the legacy. I was simply the insurance policy they'd forgotten to cancel. "Aaron," a voice snapped behind me. I didn't turn around. I knew the cadence. My sister-in-law, Bethany, stepped into the light of table 14, her diamond tennis bracelets clinking against her wrist like small metal handcuffs. She was holding a plate with a dried, single slice of sourdough bread and a piece of melon. "Your mother wants to know why you haven't gone over to congratulate Jason yet," Bethany said, her eyes dragging down my flannel shirt with a cold, analytical precision. "Everyone who matters has already shaken his hand. It looks bad that his own brother is sitting back here with the staff like a complete stranger." "I'm letting him enjoy his crowd, Bethany," I said evenly. "He earned his crowd," she countered, her jaw tightening as she leaned down, her perfume something heavy, smelling like industrial jasmines flooding the small space. "He spent 3 weeks setting up this gala. He paid $80,000 out of his own pocket to keep your father's suppliers from pulling their credit lines this month. While you were away playing soldier on the government's dime, your brother was actually keeping this family afloat. The least you can do is show some respect before the VIP guests arrive." "$80,000, I murmured, staring into my glass. "Yes, $80,000, she said, her voice rising just enough to make the catering driver across from me look up. "Real money, Aaron, not the little stipend checks you get for running errands in Maryland. So change that look on your face, get up, and go act like a member of this family." She turned on her heel, her heels clicking against the marble in a sharp, defensive rhythm. I looked down at my hands. They were calloused across the palms, the skin on my left knuckle scarred from a piece of jagged shrapnel I'd pulled out myself during a night extraction in Qatar. My fingers didn't shake. They were steady surgical, the exact same hands that had authorized the complete asset freeze of 3 separate corrupt shipping brokers across the Atlantic Maritime Zone less than 48 hours ago. I opened my phone, pulled up my private banking interface, and looked at the transaction spreadsheet. There it was. May 14th. Refinancing transfer, $80,000. Routed through an anonymous blind trust in Wilmington, Delaware, labeled under the generic entity Alpha Logistic Corridors. Jason hadn't wired his own money to my father. He'd found an unmonitored sub-account inside the Pierce Construction Ledger 1 I'd left open deliberately so the bank wouldn't flag my grandfather's medical bills, and he'd siphoned the $80,000 out, slapped his own corporate stamp on it, and presented it to Arthur like a trophy. He'd stolen my infrastructure, converted my deployment hazard pay into a Tom Ford suit, and used my silence as the platform for his theater. A familiar exhaustion settled behind my ribs. The kind of deep spiritual numbness you feel after 72 hours awake in a combat center, watching radar tracks blink green while your family chat spams photos of a brand new Porsche your brother leased with stolen capital. "Hey, look everyone, the warehouse clerk decided to join civilization." The voice boomed across the fireplace lounge as I stepped out from behind the plastic fern. Jason was grinning, waving his glass of scotch toward me as the circle of uncles parted to let me in. Arthur smirked, taking a slow sip of his drink, his posture shifting into that defensive, patriarchal alignment he used whenever he wanted to remind me of my place. "Come on in, Aaron," Jason said loudly, his arm wrapping around my father's shoulder with aggressive familiarity. "Don't be shy. We were just talking about the Ohio procurement contract. Dad was saying he might let you come down and help oversee the bricklayers on the new warehouse site since you're so good at counting inventory. It'd give you a nice, steady side hustle. God knows that military pension won't buy you a house in Savannah." The uncles laughed. One of my cousins, a guy named Tyler who worked for Jason as a junior partner, shook his head with an arrogant chuckle. "Come on, Jace. Don't tease him. The Army's got its own benefits. Free meals, right, Aaron? Starch shirts, you probably get a nice discount at the bowling alley." I stood there, my feet planted precisely shoulder-width apart, my face an unloaded weapon. "The logistics work I do is fine, Tyler," I said quietly. "Fine? That's the problem with you, Aaron," Arthur interrupted, his voice dropping the polite mask, revealing the hard, bitter edge underneath. He set his glass down on the mantelpiece with a sharp clack. "You always settled for fine. Your brother doesn't settle, he takes risks. He builds things. When my business was drowning 3 months ago, Jason didn't give me a lecture about my investments. He handed me a check. He saved the family name while you were hiding behind a government contract in Alexandria." "Dad," I said carefully, looking directly into his bloodshot eyes, "are you sure you know where that check came from?" The lounge went absolutely still. The laugh died in Jason's throat. His smirk thinned, his fingers tightening around his crystal glass until the ice rattled. For a fraction of a second, just half a breath, panic flashed across his pupils, the specific, survivalist panic of a con man realizing someone has just touched the edge of his curtain. "What is that supposed to mean?" Arthur hissed, stepping between me and Jason, his jaw working around nothing. "Are you trying to insult your brother on my father's birthday? Is that what your 18 years of service taught you? How to start drama because you're jealous of your own blood. Aaron's just mad because he couldn't get a recommendation letter for his promotion board." Jason recovered quickly, his voice sliding back into that smooth tone, pitching the narrative to the uncles. "You know how these military guys are, Dad. They think because they wear a badge, the whole world owes them a seat at the table. He doesn't understand the private sector. He doesn't know what it's like to risk real capital. He doesn't know anything about sacrifice." My mother's voice added from behind the circle. Valerie stepped forward, her face taut with controlled fury. "He's been a drain on this family's peace since the day he enlisted. Get back to your table, Aaron. The commissioner's people are arriving, and I will not have you ruining this night with your bitter little comments." I looked at the four of them, my father, my mother, my brother, and his wife, standing under the warm amber glow of a fireplace paid for by a trust fund they'd stolen from my grandfather's estate. They'd spent 2 decades telling the same story about me. They'd repeated it until the lie became weather. They'd made me small so they could feel large, and they expected me to play the part forever because compliance was easier than exposure. "You're right," I said quietly, my voice lower than the jazz music, but clean enough to cut through the syrupy southern air. "I don't know anything about your private sector." I turned away before anyone could say another word. As I marched back toward table 14, my heels striking the marble with a measured parade ground cadence, my phone vibrated in my leather jacket pocket. One notification, an internal military signal from the Lushasu Nushmaskok operations desk. Hagenhai Trank. The data audit on Pierce Global Logistics is complete. The federal procurement investigation has been escalated to active status. Federal agents are en route to your coordinates. We wait for your directive, sir. I didn't reply. I sat down at the shaky folding table next to the garbage bins, picked up my flat club soda, and stared at the gold leaf invitations lining the front row of the ballroom. The clock on the wall read 8:44 p.m. The storm outside was finally breaking against the estates, and the bill for 20 years of silence was about to arrive at the head table. Chapter 3. The chopper blade is in the cold chain of command. The rain didn't just fall, it advanced across the Grand Savannah Estates like a tactical sweep. From my position at table 14, I watched the heavy sheets of water strike the grand ballroom's double-paned windows, blurring the glowing white lights in the courtyard into messy smears of gold. Indoors, the air conditioning hummed a low, clinical tone, but it failed to cool the sticky, suffocating atmosphere of pure, unfiltered arrogance radiating from the center of the room. My grandfather's 70th birthday gala had reached its peak of theatricality. Jason had stepped onto the raised dais near the head table, flanked by a phalanx of local reporters and camera crews he'd bankrolled to document his arrival. He adjusted his Tom Ford jacket, checked the alignment of his silk pocket square in the reflection of a nearby ice sculpture, and tapped his microphone. The high-pitched whine of audio feedback sliced through the soft jazz, making several elderly relatives flinch. "Ladies and gentlemen, family, and distinguished guests," Jason announced, his voice booming with the practiced, syrupy confidence of a man who treated reality like a rough draft. He turned a dramatic gaze toward our father Arthur and our mother Valerie, who were sitting in the front row like monarchs auditing a triumph. "Tonight, we aren't just celebrating 70 years of the Pierce family heritage. Tonight, we're celebrating our transition into the elite global market." The crowd erupted into immediate, rehearsed applause. My mother clapped so hard her diamond rings threw brief, jagged flashes of light against the cedar ceiling. As the CEO of Pierce Global Logistics, Jason continued his eyes sweeping across the ballroom, deliberately missing table 14 behind the plastic fern. "I am proud to announce that our firm has officially cleared the secondary auditing phase for a 9-figure supply contract with the Department of Defense. We are the new infrastructure. We are the bloodline of maritime security." He gestured dramatically to a side entrance. 2 men in logistics corporate uniforms marched in, carrying a heavy, custom-framed velvet showcase. Inside, under recessed LED lights, rested a pristine, gold-plated miniature Ankara replica of the maritime logistics trophy Jason was claiming his firm had earned from the Pentagon. "And to ensure our operations remain flawless," Jason roared, his chin jutting skyward, "we have invited the true brokers of federal authority. Tonight we are honored to welcome the man who signs the clearances, the commander of naval procurement for the Eastern Seaboard, Colonel Marcus Vance." The name landed like a heavy boot on concrete. The applause turned deafening. My father stood up, his face flushed dark red from the scotch, cheering so loudly his tie slipped crooked at his throat. "That's my son?" Arthur yelled to a county commissioner sitting nearby. 9 figures, real capital, not like the Quen government paycheck some people are content to eat from. I took a slow, deep breath, running tactical breathing 4 seconds inhale, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds exhale, to regulate my heart rate at a steady 60 beats per minute. Discipline does not permit emotional bleeding in front of civilians. I knew Colonel Marcus Vance. I knew him intimately. 48 hours earlier, Vance had been standing at rigid, trembling attention inside a secure briefing room at the Pentagon, sweating through his service alphas while I reviewed his department's asset allocation files. Vance didn't sign the clearances. Vance waited in the hallway until I nodded. He was a desk-bound administrative officer whose entire logistical chain reported directly to Team 6 operations. The 9-figure contract Jason was flaunting on television didn't exist. It was an internal procurement template that had been flagged for contract fraud and security leaks on my desk that very morning. "Aaron," my mother's voice snapped, cutting through the noise near the kitchen doors. Valerie was standing beside table 14, her eyes hard and sharp as flint. She jabbed an acrylic-tipped finger toward the floor. "Get up. The news crews are shifting to the lobby for Colonel Vance's arrival. Your father wants you standing behind Jason's assistants to carry the presentation folders. Try to look useful for once in your life, even if you can't be successful." "I'm fine right here, Mom," I said, my voice low, flat, and stripped of turbulence. "Don't you dare start being rigid with me tonight, Aaron," she hissed, her voice dropping into that quiet, venomous frequency she reserved for the son who wouldn't join the family con. "Your brother paid $80,000 to keep the creditors off your father's back this month. He bought the food you're chewing on. The least you can do is hold his papers while real men sign real contracts. Move your feet." Beside her, Jason's wife Bethany strolled over, her diamond bracelets clinking against her champagne glass with a cold, mocking percussion. "Oh, leave him, Valerie," she smirked, looking down her nose at my leather jacket. "Some people are built for the front row, and some people are built to count boxes by the garbage bins. You can't train a warehouse clerk to walk like a millionaire. Let him stay back here with the caterers." They both laughed a short, unified burst of elitist contempt and turned their backs to me, marching toward the main lobby where the red carpet had been rolled out for the colonel. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Verbal resistance is ammunition wasted on armored ignorance. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my encrypted work phone, and typed a single 4-digit code to the tactical operations team waiting 5 miles away at Hunter Army Airfield. "Green light. Execute Langtree. Chaisen Toichen Po Toten." The phone screen went black. Exactly 12 seconds later, the world rearranged itself. It started as a low, structural tremor, a deep, heavy vibration that didn't come from the audio speakers but from the earth itself. The champagne inside the crystal flutes across the ballroom began to ripple, tiny concentric circles forming against the glass. The jazz trio stopped playing mid-measure, the saxophonist lowering his instrument to stare at the ceiling. Then came the roar. It was the unmistakable, terrifying scream of twin General Electric T700 turboshaft engines, a pair of fully armed MH-60M Black Hawk helicopters, the heavy assault birds of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, shattered the rainy night sky, banking hard over the pines of Grand Savannah Estates. The downwash from their massive rotor blades struck the ballroom's glass dome with the force of a Category 4 hurricane, ripping the decorative banners off the exterior walls and sending the outdoor patio furniture crashing into the swimming pool below. "What the hell is that?" Arthur shouted, dropping his scotch glass. The crystal shattered across the marble, amber liquid bleeding into the white linen tablecloth. "Is it a terrorist attack?" my mother shrieked, grabbing Jason's arm as the camera crews panicked, their tripods rattling against the floor. The entire ballroom descended into absolute chaos. Guests scrambled away from the windows, several women dropping their purses as the roar of the Black Hawks grew deafening, hovering directly over the rooftop landing pad. The searchlights from the lead helicopter cut through the glass dome, throwing blinding white beams of tactical light across the elegant tables, turning the Prestige Theater into a staging area. Before anyone could scream a second time, the double oaks sonate you doubles thous. "Don't just open. They were thrown back against the wall with a thunderous bang that echoed like a rifle report. Colonel Marcus Vance stepped into the ballroom, but he wasn't walking with the confident stride Jason had promised. Vance was his uniform cap was missing. His collar was damp with sweat, and his face was the exact color of wet newsprint. Behind him marched 4 fully armed federal minbinha, military police in black tactical vests, their sidearms visible, their expressions devoid of mercy. Jason's face lit up with an immediate, desperate opportunism. He broke from my mother's grip and sprinted down the red carpet toward the entrance, his arms extended. "Colonel Vance, sir, welcome to the Pierce Gala. We have the presentation folders ready for the signature." Tranre. Vance roared, his voice cracking open with pure, uncut panic. He didn't slow down. He didn't look at the presentation folders. With a single, brutal motion of his forearm, Vance shoved Jason sideways. The golden boy stumbled over his own Tom Ford trousers, his shiny shoes losing traction against the wet marble as he went flying lanhao into a display of champagne towers. The crystal glasses came crashing down in a spectacular cascade of splintering glass and bubbling alcohol, soaking his expensive suit until he looked like a drowned rat on the floor. "Jace," my father screamed, rushing forward, his hands out as if he could still catch the illusion. But Vance didn't even pause. His eyes were scanning the crowded room, darting from the head table to the VIP lounges, searching through the blinding wash of the helicopter searchlights with the terror of a man who knew his entire career was sitting on a razor blade. The military police moved in a tight crescent formation behind him, their boots hitting the marble in a unified, heavy cadence that silenced every whisper in the room. Then Vance's eyes stopped. He looked past the head table. He looked past the golden anchor trophy. He looked directly through the gaps of the plastic fern at the shaky folding table next to the kitchen doors. He saw me. The entire room seemed to freeze, the oxygen evaporating from the until the silence pressed against the ears like air pressure before a blast. You could hear the drip of the broken champagne tower against the stone paneling. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Vance marched down the center aisle, his boots chewing through the gravel and spilled alcohol. He stopped exactly 3 paces from table 14. Crack. Vance slammed his heels together so hard the sound rang through the cedar beams like a gunshot. His spine locked into a vertical regulation extension, his chest flat, his head tilted exactly 5 degrees upward. His right hand rocketed to his temple, executing a textbook, absolute salute held with trembling, white-knuckled rigidity. Behind him, the 4 armed federal agents snapped to attention in perfect unison, their visors down, their weapons held at low ready across their chests. "Bao Kao Che Hai." 200 Vance screamed, his diaphragm projecting the military address at a volume that shook the crystal chandeliers above our heads. Gun. And she seal sa fert. Nanhumig tuad. Hust may her. Mukusplik. The strike fleet has secured the maritime sector, and the Black Hawk transport is on the roof with weapons free. "We wait for your orders, Commander." The words hit the ballroom like a saturation bombing campaign. My mother, Valerie, dead non-edge, hemnon. She froze mid-step, her hands still clutched near her throat, her face draining of every ounce of color until she looked like a corpse in pearls. The glass she was holding slipped from her fingers, smashing against the flora-soft, flat sound that nobody cared to look at. Arthur Pierce, Kwanjo, Exunjo, one of quits, his knees buckling under the weight of a reality his brain couldn't compute. He stared blankly at the gold-plated anchor trophy, then at Vance, then at the son he had just ordered to sit with the servants. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. He was chewing on empty air, his entire patriarchal certainty crushed to powder in under 5 seconds. I stood up slowly from table 14. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I took off my leather jacket, revealing the slate gray tactical combat shirt underneath, the gold seal of the United States Special Operations Command glinting on my left sleeve under the white searchlights. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my common access card, the gold flag officer credential that carried the highest security clearance in Lu Sumu Kaniders Samginju Ganider, walked calmly toward the head table. Jason was still on his knees among the broken crystal, his silk pocket square soaked in champagne, staring up at me with eyes full of raw, bleeding terror. He looked small. Tragically small. Tragically small. I stopped in front of my father, placed the gold card bank hump onto the white tablecloth directly over Jason's fake contract presentation, and looked down at him with the voice of an unloaded gun, cold steel, no wasted air. The $80,000 Jason used to save your business, Dad, came from my hazardous deployment fund, I said, the words landing like drop tools on concrete. And the 9-figure contract your favorite son was bragging about tonight? I signed the cancellation order at 0600 hours this morning for corporate espionage and bribery. The military police aren't here to celebrate. They're here to execute the warrant. I turned toward Vance, my chin level, my voice steel on steel. Colonel Vance, secure the server files from Pierce Global Logistics. Arrest everyone connected to the subcontracting fraud. No exceptions, no negotiations. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Vance barked, his hand dropping from the salute as the agents moved forward, the metallic click of handcuffs closing around Jason's wrists cutting through the silent room. I walked toward the service elevator that led to the roof, my steps measured, even, and unbreakable. Behind me, my mother began to cry. Not the theatrical, manipulative sobbing she used for country club sympathy, but the ugly, airless weeping of a woman who just realized the foundation of her entire dynasty was made of paper. Arthur yelled my name once, his voice cracked and old, but I didn't look back. The sky was waiting, the mission was live, and for the first time in 30 years, the silence belonged entirely to me. The silence inside the grand ballroom of the Grand Savannah Estates wasn't merely a lack of sound. It was the heavy, crushing vacuum that follows a controlled detonation. The syrupy southern heat that had weighed so heavily on the courtyard outside now felt locked inside the room, suspended beneath the glittering crystal chandeliers. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. At the front row, my mother, Valerie, stood perfectly still, her hands frozen midair as though she were still trying to parse the vocabulary Colonel Marcus Vance had just thrown into the room. The long string of pearls around her neck looked less like an heirloom and more like a noose. Across the aisle, Arthur Pierce, the patriarch who had spent 30 years measuring human beings by the thickness of their wallets, remained Yukon Mahal. His body completely caved into the plush fabric of the velvet seating. His jaw worked silently around nothing, a grotesque caricature of a powerful man who had completely run out of scripts to read. Jason lay spread-eagled on the wet marble floor, a collapsed monument of Tom Ford silk and expensive linen. Champagne from the shattered towers dripped steadily from the lapels of his jacket, forming small, bubbling puddles around his hands. He looked toward the armed federal Haya-men, military police, standing at rigid attention beside table 14, and the expression in his pupils shifted from supreme confidence to the raw, bleeding terror of a cornered animal. Colonel Vance, Jason managed, his voice cracking open like dry wood, his hand trembling as he reached blindly toward the officer's polished boots. There's a massive mistake. The logistics expansion, we just received the pre-clearance authorization from your office, Dad and I. We just paid the suppliers. Shut your mouth, Pierce. Vance barked, his face still sheet white under the harsh white glare of the helicopter searchlight slicing through the glass dome. He didn't look down at the con man. He kept his eyes locked firmly onto me, his arm held at a rigid, absolute salute. The only procurement authorization your firm received was in bait template generated by Defense Criminal Investigative Services. Your corporate infrastructure doesn't exist. It's an empty shell designed to siphon black budget capital. Arthur's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide and bloodshot, fixed onto the gold common access card I had placed pinned to bolt in the table. The Conde BNG Fintermanage, not the gold flag officer seal of the United States Special Operations Command, gleamed beneath the white tactical beams. "Aaron," Arthur whispered, his voice sounding scraped raw, losing the deep, commanding timbre he had used to humiliate me 45 minutes ago. He looked at my flannel shirt, then at the gold seal on my sleeve, his fingers twitching in his lap. "What? What did you do?" "I didn't do anything, Dad," I said, my voice low, flat, and entirely devoid of turbulence. "I simply stopped paying for the illusion." I stepped out from behind table 14, the old leather jacket draped loosely over my left arm. Every single colonel and major in the room stood at rigid attention as I walked past them. The space between the auxiliary kitchen entrance and the head table, the exact distance my family had used to isolate me now, felt like a gauntlet of absolute authority. "The $80,000 Jason wired to your accounting ledger 3 months ago didn't come from his investment portfolio," I continued, stopping directly across from my father. The white linen tablecloth between us was stained dark purple from his spilled scotch. "It was routed from my secondary operational hazard account through a blind trust in Wilmington. I left that supply line open so grandfather's medical bills wouldn't go to collections. Jason hacked the routing code, stamped his corporate entity onto the transfer, and sold it to you as his achievement. And you bought it because you preferred the story where he was the millionaire and I was the clerk." "No!" my mother shrieked, her voice turning shrill, breaking through the clinical hum of the air conditioning. She lunged forward, her acrylic nails clawing at my father's shoulder. "That's a lie. Jason closed the Akron Logistics merger. He's the one who pays the mortgage on this estate. Aaron is just doing this to humiliate us because we didn't let him sit at the front table." "Check the server logs, Mom," I said calmly. Vance didn't wait for my directive. He flicked his wrist toward the 4 military police officers flanking the dais. "Secure the target's personal mobile devices and lock down the estate's digital routing nodes. Initiate protocol under Federal Procurement Fraud Title 10. The Hayahum been moved with tactical precision, their heavy boots drumming against the marble. 2 of them hoisted Jason off the floor by his wet elbows, the sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking around his wrists echoing across the silent ballroom like a closing door. "Dad, tell him!" Jason screamed, his knees dragging against the rug as they hauled him back toward the service hallway. His gold cufflinks scratched an ugly permanent groove into the polished stone molding. "Tell them it's an asset misunderstanding. The director promised me." "The director reports to Team 6, Jason." I cut him off, my stare locking onto his pupils until he stopped struggling. "He doesn't sign contracts with civilians who possess 0 security clearance. You borrowed my credibility to build a scaffolding of fraud, and tonight the bill arrived." Arthur looked from Jason to the gold card on the table, his entire posture shrinking until his blazer looked 2 sizes too large on his shoulders. The confidence he had carried his entire life, the casual tring. Shh. Thunk sush. Certainty that had governed our house since the day I turned 18 collapsed frame by frame. He looked down at his massive, blunt fingers, those hands that had measured success by the noise of the crowd, and found absolutely nothing left to grip. You were the Hi, Trant. Nickery Carver. A single tear cutting an ugly path through the flesh on his cheek. He looked up, his eyes filled with a sudden, devastating clarity. "The whole time. Those deployments, the birthdays I missed. You didn't miss them because you couldn't come, Dad," I said softly, the sentence landing with the weight of a dropped tool on concrete. "You missed them because you chose not to. You decided 20 years ago who I was, and then you spent 20 years collecting evidence to make yourself comfortable with that decision." Valerie collapsed fully onto her velvet chair, her face buried in her hands as the news crews Jason had brought began turning their lenses away from the stage and directly onto her. The red live lights of the cameras burned bright in the dim succumb. capturing the complete, irreversible demolition of the Pierce family image in real time. I picked up my gold credential from the stained linen, slid it back into my leather jacket pocket, and turned toward the service elevator. The twin turboshaft engines of the Black Hawks on the roof kept roaring. Shem Vaho Ke Hong Kai. A heavy, rhythmic pulse that signaled my transition back to the real world. "Aaron, wait," Arthur called out, his voice small, weak, and entirely stripped of authority as he took a tentative step toward the auxiliary hallway. I didn't break stride. I didn't alter my breathing. I walked out through the double doors, leaving behind the wreckage of a paper kingdom they had spent a lifetime building and destroyed in a single evening. The elevator doors slid shut, the metallic teeth grinding closed with a sharp, final snap. And for the first time in my entire life, the silence inside my chest was absolute.